And now they're faced with a very real prospect of Donald Trump becoming the leader of the party, and it absolutely drives them crazy. They just cannot imagine sharing. Well, because he's an outsider. He's not them. He's not part of the club. He's uncontrollable. He hasn't been through the initiation rites. He didn't belong to the secret society. And I think that they don't see him.
The book President Trump doesn't want you to read is hitting bookstores.
The publisher not only ignored the president's cease and desist letter, it moved up the publication date 4 days because of what they called unprecedented demand.
Cease and desist. That is the order from President Trump's lawyers this afternoon as they try to plug the explosive and even disturbing details erupting in excerpts from a tell-all book that will now be published tomorrow morning. Trump's lawyers have sent these warning letters to the publisher and the author, Michael Wolff, to try to halt publication, not for national security reasons, not for state secrets that put people's lives at risk, but because the reports paint such an unflattering picture, including savage quotes about the president and his family made by people that President Trump considered allies.
Yeah, there's so many questions to ask. One that Michael Wolff asked yesterday on Twitter, Gabe Sherman had brought up that Rupert Murdoch had such a hostile relationship with Michael Wolff. You had everybody in the West Wing who had no idea who Michael Wolff was, which is just mind-blowing for people that are running the country, don't know who Michael Wolff was. All they had to do, and Jared Kushner and Donald Trump and people in the West Wing were in daily contact with Rupert Murdoch. If they just asked Murdoch about Michael Wolff, he would have said, get him the hell out of there now.
Right. Well, it reveals the lack of discipline that Michael writes about throughout the book. Let's go back to how he even got access to the White House in the first place. In June of 2016, Michael had done a cover story of the Hollywood Reporter on Donald Trump, and Trump had invited Michael to his house in Beverly Hills. And the story was not flattering. This was a story where Michael was questioning Trump about Brexit, and he was quite confused, didn't know what Brexit was, didn't seem to know who Peter Thiel was, who was about to speak at the Republican National Convention on his behalf. When Michael brought up Peter Thiel, he looked confused and said, "Oh, is that a friend of Jared's?" And so on and so on. And, even calling the furniture in Trump's home that of a 4-star hotel, not a 5-star hotel, the kinds of notes that would typically drive Trump insane. But after that, the cover was sort of cool looking, and Michael got an email from Hope Hicks saying, "Great cover!" And so shortly after that, Michael went in for the kill. This is Michael. He is a shark. He went in for the kill and asked for access to the White House.
We begin tonight with a bombshell book by Michael Wolff, which paints a stunning picture of dysfunction in the Trump campaign and White House and contains stunning quotes from Steve Bannon, who is, let's remember, the president's former top political advisor, his campaign mastermind, the one who stood by him when no one else would, even when the Access Hollywood tape hit. Now it seems Bannon has turned on his old boss.
6 in 10 Americans believe Trump is unqualified to serve as president.
He's not qualified to be president.
Unfit to be president.
Unfit to be commander-in-chief.
The Des Moines Register writing that Trump is, quote, not only unfit to hold office, but unfit to stand on the same stage as his Republican opponents.
I say not in a braggadocious way. I've made billions and billions of dollars. I made a tremendous amount of money. I'm really rich. I have a great temperament. They love me anyway. I don't have to do this. I've done an amazing job. I was born with a certain intellect. God helped me by giving me a certain brain.
One day it would be wonderful to have an entrepreneur running the White House, but not this entrepreneur. I first got to know him many years ago when he invited me to lunch, and there was just the two of us. I was expecting an interesting lunch talking about various things in the world, and instead I got a lunch where all he talked about was his bankrupt companies.
I went to the best colleges, or college. I went to I had a situation where I was a very excellent student, came out, made billions and billions of dollars, became one of the top business people, went to television, and for 10 years was a tremendous success, as you probably have heard. Ran for president one time and won.
And how he'd run 5 people to get help. and financial help when he'd gone bankrupt. And that those 5 people had said that on that occasion they weren't willing to help him. And then he spent the rest of his lunch telling me how he was going to spend the rest of his life destroying those 5 people.
You're so interested in this book. Why would I not be interested in this book? It is so salacious and juicy. I'm a politics diehard, and I just can't wait to read it.
At 320 pages, this is a relatively light tome, but it is filled with explosive material. The author, Michael Wolff, said he spent 18 months conducting about 200 interviews with senior White House staff.
Did you talk to the president?
What was I doing there if he didn't want me to be there?
Well, let me ask you, did you talk to the president? Did you interview him for this book?
I absolutely spoke to the president. Whether he realized it was an interview or not, I don't know, but it certainly was not off the record. I've spent about 3 hours with the president over the course of the campaign in the White House. So my window into Donald Trump is pretty significant. But even more to the point, I spent, and this was really sort of the point of the book, I spoke to people who spoke to the president on a daily, sometimes minute-by-minute basis. Donald Trump will attack. He will send lawyers letters. This is a 35-year history of how he approaches everything.
Do you have recordings of some of these interviews and some of these conversations?
Well, I work like every journalist works. So I have recordings, I have notes. I am certainly absolutely in every way comfortable with everything I've reported in this book.
Would you release any of those recordings since your credibility is being questioned?
My credibility is being questioned by a man who has less credibility than perhaps anyone who has ever walked on Earth at this point.
And in Los Angeles, strategist at Eldridge Industries and part owner of The Hollywood Reporter, Janice Min. Janice was one of 6 guests that attended the Steve Bannon Roger Ailes dinner party that was detailed in Michael Wolff's book. Janice, let's begin with you. I love the correspondence that you said you had back and forth with Michael Wolff when Michael was roaming around the West Wing, and you were asking him, what exactly do they think you are doing there, Michael? And to which he responded what?
He said, I don't know what they think I'm doing. And different answers at different times would be, but I'm going to keep doing it until they tell me not to. And I remember there was a key moment when Kelly was brought in as chief of staff. And I said, who was supposed to bring law and order to the West Wing. And I said to Michael, so, is the jig up now that Kelly's there? And Michael responded to me, there is so much chaos. I think I am last on the totem pole of the concerns. And he did proceed to be in there for many, many, many more weeks, even with Kelly in the White House.
Well, tell us about the dinner that's detailed in the book.
Yes.
First of all, is it accurate? And what were the surprises? What surprised you in the dinner?
Everything was surprising. The details in the book are accurate. It was the whole dinner from start to finish was about 5 hours. Roger Ailes and his wife Elizabeth arrived first. And remember, this is on the heels of Ailes being ousted from Fox News. He hadn't spoken to any media, was not allowed to speak to any media. And the two of them were thick as thieves on everything, Elizabeth and Roger. She was his staunch defender, angrier about the way he was treated than he was. And really, if you were to just, by their accounts, they simply were baffled, could not believe any of these allegations coming forward, believed there was people were personally motivated to get ahead in their careers, that Roger was a great champion of women, and they believed it so much that you could see how they could convince others that it wasn't true. He also was very candid about his feelings about Rupert Murdoch, and I thought tellingly at dinner, Roger sat to my right, and we were talking about Donald Trump, and Roger said, I'm a lifelong Republican, but these guys kind of scare me. And this is, many days I've thought since that conversation, what would the nature of Fox News be today if Ailes had been kept in charge? Would it be the House News channel for the White House? I don't know.
In one passage, Wolf says former British Prime Minister Tony Blair offered this nugget of information to the president's son-in-law, Jared Kushner. There was, he suggested, the possibility that the British had had the Trump campaign staff under surveillance. Blair is denying the claim. Another passage describes a potential change in Saudi Arabia the president was considering before his trip last spring to the Middle East. In the days before his departure, he was telling people that the Saudis were going to finance an entirely new military presence in the kingdom, supplanting and even replacing the U.S. command headquarters in Qatar. Fire and Fury wasn't supposed to be released until Tuesday, but the book's publisher moved the date up after attorneys for President Trump issued a cease and desist letter threatening legal action.
What we can't have is the same old politics of division that we have seen so many times before, that dates back centuries. Some of the politics we see now, we thought we put that to bed. I mean, that's folks looking 50 years back. It's the 21st century, not the 19th century.
It's not a Muslim ban, but we're totally prepared. It's working out very nicely. You see it at the airports, you see it all over. It's working out very nicely. And we're going to have a very, very strict ban, and we're going to have extreme vetting, which we should have had in this country for many years.
Indeed, none of the executive order halting refugees and visitors from 7 Muslim-majority nations is a surprise. It was all promised by Donald Trump on the campaign trail.
No hate, no fear. Refugees are welcome.
Protesters gathered at airports outside and inside the United States. The shock and outrage spread over news visa holders and those with green cards were barred entry. But many say it's feeling less so now, after Donald Trump signed an executive order blocking refugees and visitors from 7 Muslim-majority countries. Despite the outcry, Trump spent Saturday calling 5 foreign leaders, including the Russian president and German chancellor, but also the French president, who has expressed concern about the message the U.S. president is sending.
The speeches we hear from the United States encourage extremist populism.
Back in the United States, the tech giant Google also released a statement of concern, fearing the new restrictions would prevent its skilled workers from doing their jobs. And legal challenges are mounting. Lawyers from the American Civil Liberties Union and the nation's top Muslim advocacy group say Trump's executive order is just dressed-up discrimination.
I always like to threaten to sue reporters because I think they're among the most dishonest people I've ever dealt with in my life.
Notice the key word there, threaten. Threaten to sue reporters. Wolf and his publisher are now in good company. President Trump has previously threatened to sue CNN, the Washington Post, the New York Times, the Associated Press, comedian Tom Arnold, a 92-year-old Scottish widow, reporter David K. Johnston, Art of the Deal co-author Tony Schwartz, Governor John Kasich, Senator Ted Cruz, and all of the women who accused him of sexual harassment and assault. And that's just a small sampling, and those are just lawsuits because of criticisms those people made about the president in public, to say nothing of his business deals. The president almost never actually follows through with these lawsuits, and it would be very difficult to win a libel suit, especially to block this book prior to publication, which will be tomorrow morning.
Hillary has real plans to address the concerns she's heard from you on the campaign trail. She's got specific ideas to invest in new jobs, to help workers share in their company's profits, to help put kids in preschool and put students through college without taking on a ton of debt. That's what leaders do. And then there's Donald Trump. Don't boo, vote. The Donald is not really a plans guy. He's not really a facts guy either. He calls himself a business guy, which is true, but I have to say I know plenty of businessmen and women who've achieved remarkable success without leaving a trail of lawsuits and unpaid workers and people feeling like they got cheated. Does anyone really believe that a guy who spent his 70 years on this earth showing no regard for working people is suddenly going to be your champion, your voice? If so, you should vote for him. But if you're someone who's truly concerned about paying your bills, if you're really concerned about pocketbook issues and seeing the economy grow and creating more opportunity for everybody, then the choice isn't even close. If you want someone with a lifelong track record of fighting for higher wages and better benefits and a fairer tax code and a bigger voice for workers and stronger regulations on Wall Street, then you should vote for Hillary Clinton.
Saying last year in a Rolling Stone article, yeah, she's really something, and what a beauty, that one. If I weren't happily married, and, you know, her father.
My daughter, Ivanka. Yeah. She's 6 feet tall. She's got the best body. Yeah, she's hot.
Ivanka continues to defend her father and has said he is not sexist. Earlier, her Twitter account showed a little heart liking an article about her father's decade-old comments to Howard Stern. The Trump campaign directed us to Ivanka's brand manager, and a source there tells us it wasn't Ivanka who personally liked the item. It was, quote, a simple mistake by a staff member. CNN has reached out to the Trump campaign for a response about the comments themselves.
That if Ivanka weren't my daughter, perhaps I'd be dating her. You know?
Stop it! Oh, it's so weird. Stop. You know what? You are sick.
Far from pretend confused when talk show host Wendy Williams asked about things the two have in common.
What's the favorite thing you have in common with your father?
Either real estate or golf.
Donald, with your daughter?
Well, I was going to say sex, but I can't relate that. I can't relate that.
And he got it. And, you know, from the second after the inauguration, and he was in there. But, you know, going back to the dinner party, I was blown away by the level of trust and confidence Steve Bannon and Roger Ailes had in Michael. He was clearly one of them. I mean, they liked him, they trusted him, and they spoke openly. I mean, the sort of repartee at the dinner party, Michael and I were blown. Afterwards, we were incredulous, saying, we just watched the formation of the cabinet, the Republican agenda laid out, and we really got to see who was in charge of these decisions. And there was no disputing that Bannon was the one driving the car at that point. You know, when he sat down, among the first things he said, you know, day one, we're moving the embassy to Jerusalem, which it was not day one, but that was important to him. He talked about Rudy Giuliani, what they were going to, you know, what are we going to do about Rudy? He's upset he didn't get Secretary of State. And Ailes, they have this, you know, really casual way about them. They know each other well. And Ailes says, you know, don't worry about Rudy. Just let him be photographed coming once or twice out of Air Force One. He'll be fine. He'll be fine. And then, you know, Ailes is asking Bannon, what about Georgette? What are you going to do with Georgette? And he's talking about Georgette Mossbacher, New York City socialite, big figure in the party. And Bannon said, and I don't know if this even ever happened, Bannon said, oh, we're giving her Slovenia as an ambassadorship. And they talked about other people who were seeking ambassadorships. And then you know, the only time I saw, you know, Bannon, we picture him as this foaming mouth, rabid dog. He was incredibly calm and rational. The only two times I saw him get very heated and animated at the meal was when he said, you know what, we have our chance to get three of our people on the Supreme Court. And when we do that, and I think he used an expletive, you know, the other side is going to effing say we won. And so he was very adamant about that. The second time I saw him get very animated, he said, forget about the Middle East. Why are people, like, the conflict's not in the Middle East. Everyone needs to be looking at China. And he went on this unbelievably manic long tirade about how China is the problem. China has stolen America's middle class. I'm getting it back. And he said, you know, the South China Sea is where the action's going to be. And he said, and he create, you know, he's knows an enormous amount about arcane Chinese history, and he mentioned some theory, which I was not aware of, about conflict happening every 17 years, war happening every 17 years in Asia, where the greater power destroys the lesser power, but to the detriment of the greater power.
Okay. All right, Janice, man, thank you so much for being with us. A remarkable recounting of what sounds like an absolutely remarkable dinner.
Yes,
and
it was.
What a story. Thank you so much for being with us.
Hey, when you're a star, they let you do it. You can do anything.
Whatever you want.
Grab them by the... You can do anything.
Look at those legs. All I can see is the legs.
No, it looks good.
Come on, shorty.
Oh, nice legs, huh?
Oof, get out of the way, huh? That's good legs. Go ahead.
It's always good if you don't fall out of the bus. Like Ford, Gerald Ford, remember?
Down below. Pull the hand.
Hello, how are you? Hi.
Trump, how are
Nice
you?
seeing you. Terrific.
Nice to meet you.
No word on whether Donald Trump believes that that was Donald Trump who got out of that bus. None of the people around Donald Trump who heard him say this would dare to tell him afterwards that they actually heard him very clearly speaking on the Access Hollywood video and that they saw and heard him apologize for every word he said on the Access Hollywood video.
I said it, I was wrong, and I apologize.
The Times reports in January, shortly before his inauguration, Mr. Trump told a Republican senator that he wanted to investigate the recording that had him boasting about grabbing women's genitals. We don't think that was my voice, Mr. Trump told the senator, according to a person familiar with the conversation. Conservative British Prime Minister Theresa May was outraged by the president's erratic behavior today when the president retweeted unverified videos posted by the leader of a British extremist group called Britain First. Prime Minister Theresa May said it is wrong for the president to have done this. To consider what else is wrong with the president, joining us now is Dr. Lance Dotis of the Boston Psychoanalytic Society and Institute. He's a former assistant professor of psychiatry at Harvard Medical School. And back with us is Eugene Robinson. Dr. Dotis, what are we seeing here in these new stories about the president telling people things that they absolutely know to be true, that are on video, where they hear his voice? That's fake. That's not me, even after he publicly apologized for every word of it?
Yes, well, I think it's another example of his being close to psychosis when he is stressed. When he says things like this, which are not in his interest, he would be better off saying, I'm sorry, that was a mistake, and let it go. But when he goes back and then denies reality, people have trouble understanding that. The simple explanation for it, which people don't want to hear, is that he's not in control of himself. This is what we mean when we say that somebody is becoming psychotic or is briefly psychotic. So all of his delusional ideas come up when he is stressed in some way, and then he loses track of reality because it doesn't fit what he needs to believe. The problem has been that we think of people as psychotic people as being folks who think that they are Napoleon, and that's easy to tell. And if you're not that, people think you're not psychotic. But unfortunately, the world is more complicated, and people like Donald Trump are on the border, and they slip into delusional thinking when stressed. An extremely dangerous thing, naturally, for anybody, especially somebody who has been so wantonly unconcerned about the welfare of others and willing to do anything to promote himself. So he's an enormous present danger to us from the standpoint of creating a nuclear war, and even from the standpoint of doing what he can to destroy democracy, as well as attacking ethnic groups the way he's done.
What has been fun is discovering little details that help us understand President Trump a little bit more. For instance, why he eats so much McDonald's.
Trump had a long-time fear of being poisoned. That's one reason he ate so much McDonald's. The food was pre-made, and no one knew he was coming.
So let me get this straight. Let me get this straight. Trump only trusts food if the people who made it had no idea it was for him. That's why he goes to McDonald's. Now I can't help picturing some random person at McDonald's, and just before they bite their burger, the president bursts out of the ball pits and grabs their food, just like, surprise! Yum, 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 yum. Like, surprise! Yum, 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 yum.
By the way, somebody not me went potty in the ball pit.
Seriously, half this